never thought I'd ever say this again, but by God, it's the eve of a brand new Star Wars movie. And while the hipster-goggled goat fucker behind the camera has, in my opinion, never produced a fucking frame of entertaining film in his life, I'm still pulling for it to live up to the Lucas legacy. In short, I'm excited, you're excited, it's fucking Star Wars, man! And as I've contended with appalling frequency, even the worst Star Wars flick is infinitely more watchable than 90% of the films in existence today. But Star Wars boasts far more than a filmic focus, whether it be the wireframe fuckery of the original Star Wars The Arcade Cabinet, or the flagrantly uninspired Star Wars skin job on the recent Battlefront. This license has, of course, had its soaring heights and its subterranean lows. So with earnest hopes that J.J. Abrams can make the first decent film of his life, let's fuel our hype machines with a spot of Star Wars. I give you a completely unprofessional, blatantly biased list of what are, in my opinion, 5 of the greatest games to ever bear the title, though once lost to the eternally revolving door of ephemeral game design thanks to emerging services like Steam and goodoldgames.com. Many of these titles are not only available right now, but optimized to work on modern machines to boot. So if you like what you see, in many cases you can not only grab this shit, but often do so for an absolute pittance. So without further delay, it's time to saddle up for some Star Wars.
And now.
Much has been written about the impact of the wildly popular SNES standout Super Star Wars, and with good reason. The game was punishingly difficult but endlessly addictive, with multiple playstyles, weapon upgrades, and playable characters. The faithful reproduction of the incomparable John Williams film score was revolutionary for the time, and more to the goddamn point, shit was fun! Though regrettably only ever a purely single-player, side-scrolling experience, many the hour could I devote to regaling you fine fuckers with stories of my friends frantically passing the controller between us like the only pipe in the crack house, token the fuck up on some intergalactic gallantry. In that sense, the 3 entries in the Super Star Wars series represent some of the finest social gaming experiences of my adolescent life, if not precisely multiplayer ones. But in my eyes, none quite attain the level of 1994's Super Return of the Jedi. More characters, more power-ups, more levels, greater variations in gameplay, more, better, stronger, faster, fuck me sideways, what a side-scroller, and lest we forget one cheat code to rule them all, A, B, B, X, X, Y, Y, A, B, X, Y, A, B, X, Y, fuck the Contra cunts, I can recite that shit in my sleep. This cheat code was my religion as a child, allowing any and all to play with whatever weapon power-up they wished, whatever character, on whatever stage, and whatever part of said stage at goddamn will. Remember the time Wicket the Ewok dropped the man-tittied space slug movie Baba the Hutt? Of course you goddamn don't, I did that shit. Frustration and fun by the fuckload, without once lapsing a bit too far into frustration a la the Super The Empire Strikes from the Backside game that preceded it. That game bent me over the coffee table and took off the top 3 layers of ass lining with a penile colonoscopy. Super Return of the Jedi at least whispered sweet nothings into my ear while it did so. Strap on the nostalgia goggles and play that shit. Next. Building on the storied legacy of the deviceful Dark Forces and Jedi Knight, 2002's Jedi Outcast was an even greater commercial success, one that for the second time made the leap to consoles on the original Xbox and did so to considerable acclaim. And while I don't feel Outcast quite held up to the lofty standards of its prolific predecessor, the sequel was a whole other ball of fucking yarn, turning a very hard eye to the wildly popular Saber Battle X mod for the original Jedi Knight. 2003's Jedi Academy drew inspiration directly from the fanbase, crafting what remains to this day the single most accurate, exhilarating simulation of lightsaber combat ever expunged from LucasArts' LucasAss. Single, double, or saber staff, you slash your fucking way through a narratively non-Euclidean, albeit mechanically linear, single-player campaign featuring a customizable player character whose decisions, be they aligned with the light or dark sides of the Force, will, like the first game in the series, dramatically affect the outcome of the game. Up the ante on the somewhat streamlined force powers from Jedi Outcast, and what you're left with is a game that has stood the test of time as the worthy sequel JK2 should have been. You can still find this shit at any thrift store in existence for all of $5, and yes, Rageaholics, it is backwards compatible as a motherfucker. You owe it to the Jedi and all of us to boot this shit up and force lightning some fuckers. Next.
This is but a taste of the dark side.
By the early 2000s, with a back catalog that seemed to tower considerably higher than LucasArts' fast-fading contemporary fortunes, the rapidly putrefying publisher reached out to intermediaries to add to the ever-expanding library of their reliable Star Wars hits. It seemed by that point that the house that Lucas built had staked a convincing claim to virtually every genre imaginable, from the pioneering space sim action of the X-Wing and TIE Fighter series to the tense real-time strategy of Galactic Battlegrounds and beyond. But it wasn't until 2003 that, thanks to the boundless talents of a first-party Canadian Microsoft developer you may have heard of by the name of, BioWare, that the Star Wars license at last put the jewel in its crown. The Star Wars RPG we'd been perpetually pining for, Knights of the Old Republic, simultaneously pushing forward the isometric antics of the company's Baldur's Gate license, while shifting to a more personal cinematic approach that would prove to be a crucial design pillar in BioWare's later video game output. 2003's KOTOR stands as an uncontested monolith in the PC and Xbox libraries, one of only a handful of emerging Western RPGs in the early 2000s that helped demonstrate to consumers how stale the Japanese approach to the genre had become, and its seemingly limitless promise in the hands of its Western competition. Sliding into the role of a seemingly nameless citizen of the Old Republic knocked unconscious during a Sith attack, upon being saved by the mercenary Cartho Nassi, it's immediately apparent that something is very different about you specifically. You seem to have a preternatural affinity for the Force, for one, and every fucker in the galaxy wants a piece of your Force-flinging ass. Upon hooking up with a Jedi Bastila, you set upon a quest that will span vast tracts of known space, ultimately unraveling the mystery of your true identity in one of the best-laid plot twists in the history of Star Wars and gaming at large. Very possibly BioWare's finest hour, and its Obsidian-produced sequel, as you can see from the poster directly above my head, is just as goddamn good. Star Wars: The Old Republic, a game with a villain so unerringly bitchin' J.J. Abrams ganked his ass. I love this game, and you will too. Next.
Use it well. Use it for good.
In fleeting form, the eradication of life from a star system. Remember, it will be your path to the ways of the Force.
Dark Forces, while fun by the standards of the period, I think we can all admit was a bit of a capitalistic Me Too effort aimed at exploiting the burgeoning PC shooter genre, selling graphics cards by the unmitigated cockload at the time thanks chiefly to the trite trinity of Doom, Quake, and Wolfenstein 3D. Not to be outdone, LucasArts bounded into the fore and emerged with a game that was fun, but not quite exceptional. And then came time for the sequel, with little to distinguish the inaugural effort from its contemporaries outside of a fucking Star Wars skin. Now, where have I fucking heard that before? 1996's superlative Jedi Knight made itself the very first, and in my opinion, still the best, Django Fett fucking Jedi simulator on the market. Cast into the role of famed mercenary Kyle Katarn, delineated in convincing fashion via some of the more professional, live-action cutscenes I've ever seen in the format, the player initially finds the formula largely unchanged from the previous effort. But then, in drops the lightsaber. Don't get me wrong, dropping bitches with a bowcaster is badass squared, but once you break out that fucking laser sword and start savaging stormtroopers like a coked up Musashi while hurling lightning bolts and force-gripping fuckers into the hereafter, that's when you realize how profoundly special Jedi Knight truly was. With a branching narrative system featuring tense, albeit binary, moral choices that can mean the difference between life and death for the player, his enemies, and of course his companions.
Excellent, Katan.
You've started your journey to the dark side. But that is not enough.
Looks like I can't bail you out of trouble this time.
Strike her down. and realize your true destiny as a dark Jedi, your true power.
One I'd hasten to add has been ripped off and ripped off and ripped fucking off for the past 20 years of game design at goddamn least. Jedi Knight was every bit the benchmark to gaming at large that it was for the Star Wars license in general. And let's not forget that motherfucking multiplayer. This game, along with erstwhile classics like Age of Empires and MechWarrior 3 and 4, put Microsoft's MSN gaming zone on the map, forming the blueprint for what would later become a little thing called Xbox Live in the process. By association, Jedi Knight helped create modern multiplayer gaming as we know it, and those mods, those skins, the custom stages, Saber Battle X, all these congealed to give Jedi Knight a thriving community well after its more popular, but in my opinion, demonstrably inferior sequel dropped in 2002. Possibly the greatest single artistic and financial success of the LucasArts regime. Godspeed, Jedi Knight. God fucking speed. Next.
Can't get a lock. Thanks, Screen Leader. That was way too close for comfort. Thanks for your help. No problem, Otana.
Many attempts of varying levels of artistic and financial success had been produced in an effort to capitalize on the boundless appeal of the Star Wars universe by the early 90s. While George Lucas had no designs on ever returning to the franchise at that point, he remained content to keep the unremittingly popular series on life support via his newly established LucasArts video game publisher and studio. But it wasn't until 1993 that shit got real, with the likes of Elite and, more importantly, Space Rogue and Wing Commander establishing the iconography for the nascent space sim genre. The world was not quite prepared when the inevitable happened. Star Wars made a space sim of its own. The monumental X-Wing established its presence in a new and exciting genre in concert with an effort to push it forward. An effort that succeeded with aplomb in both fucking aims, virtually creating the market for PC flight sticks in the process, ushering in multiple expansions, including the almighty B-Wing Master Race, and ultimately spawning what is, in my opinion, the greatest Star Wars title of them all. 1999's immortal X-Wing Alliance. X-Wings, A-Wings, Y-Wings, TIE Defenders, the Outlander, the Falcon, capital ships, single, double, and multi-crew combat that one Chris Roberts can still barely get right some 16 fucking years later. Not one ship left the fuck out, unlike the what the fuck is a B-Wing brigade over a fucking Rogue Squadron. All this wrapped into an endlessly replayable single-player campaign, albeit one that takes frequent opportunities to smack you flush in the jowls with its turgid difficulty cock, and bolstered with 100% customizable multiplayer light years before Halo 3 in its fucking Forge mode. Yet another staple to the bygone days of MSN Gaming Zone. It's almost impossible to describe how engaging, enthralling, and incessantly addictive the act of playing this game was in an online multiplayer context. 12-man dogfights, rebels versus Imperials, smugglers squaring off with TIEs, TIE bombers against calamari cruisers, pirates, raids on mining facilities. This is Star Wars, and this is X-Wing motherfucking Alliance, the greatest Star Wars game of all time. Play that shit. Thanks for joining me, and God fucking speed, rebel scum.
Not so distinctive now, is it?
Enough of this.